I'm Jessica Berg. I'm the principal agent at Rosecliff Literary. I generally look for anything that takes up space, challenges norms, and carves out a new lane in publishing. So the easiest way is if your work has hauntings that are real or metaphorical, some kind of identity reclamation, or a structure that probably shouldn't work, but it does, I already want your manuscript. I would love a new take on an office comedy of sorts. I think 2020 really shifted the way we think about work. And so if we could find something that feels fresh and new, that would be fantastic. I would take a Gothic romance any day of the week. Absolutely. And then, I think we're all feeling the horror. So give me something horror that's not like just cutting off body parts, but maybe allowing us to see a little bit more of the psychological suspense. So, in the nonfiction side, I'm drawn to narrative nonfiction and memoir that explores women in men's spaces. So, think espionage, foreign service, diplomatic corps, anything like that. I think it provides a really fantastic opportunity to look at that experience in a way that we don't see. And then in the fiction side, I am such a generalist, and I'm so sorry to say that. Because I understand that that makes it so difficult for careering authors, but really what I'm looking for is voice over anything at this point. If it's got a fresh hook, if it feels compelling, if the pacing is spot on. So that can range from commercial fiction to upmarket literary, some historical fiction, provided it's not World War II. I think the easier way to answer that is probably what I'm not interested in right now, which is anything super heavy sci-fi, high fantasy, mid fantasy, steampunk, space opera, anything in those spaces probably aren't the best fit for me. I was listening to a podcast. The professor of horror at NYU was saying that historically, when we look back and we see the werewolf emerge in horror, what we're seeing is the horror is coming from inside us, which means the person is in one way and then becomes the other, versus the vampiric horror, which is the person comes from the outside and then comes in to take something but goes away. So, ostensibly, what he's saying is this horror is homegrown, which is, I think, why we're seeing such that resurgence of horror as a genre right now. I am looking for horror light. I don't necessarily need to know about the tendons being cut. We can infer. But yeah, absolutely. I'd love to see some horror. So I think what makes a book go from good to great is that it feels inevitable, right? Like that story should already exist, and the author has told it in a way that couldn't have been told any other way. Don't get caught up on the research. I think so many authors will spin themselves into, okay, I need to interview my character, and now I need to know who their crush was in fourth grade and what color they first painted their nails, right? Sometimes we get in our own way. So just it really is button chair, get the story written, and then worry about all of those things. That's why you have trusted CPs and beta readers and everyone else in your space that helps bring your story to life.
What's your favorite part about being an agent?
Oh my gosh, I love being a connector. I love finding a story that all story deserves to be out in the world, first of all. But I love finding a story that I know I can position in the right way to be received by the market, taking that author and allowing them to meet that editor for whom they are the perfect match. It is such a marriage. And then being able to walk away. Because I just love being a connector. And you find me at a party and I'll say, "Hey, have you met this person?" And then I fade into the background. And I feel like I get to do that every day with work. I was just at a birthday party on Sunday, and this elderly person was telling me about the memoirs that they wrote so that their grandchildren would know who they are. And I mean, they had a fantastic life story anyway. And the entire time in my mind, I'm like frothing. I'm like, okay, okay, tell me the rest. So what's going on? I'm thinking through in a business perspective. And I said, "Oh, have you thought about publishing?" And obviously, we all understand memoir is a difficult space, but this person said, "Oh yeah, I'm absolutely doing KDP." And then we got into this whole conversation about Ingram Spark and like how you market. And I thought, well, I'm at this random birthday party. This should not be occurring right now, but it is. I think in our profession, we're constantly thinking about narrative. We're constantly looking for ways to bring people who have story into what the space is. I recently convinced a friend who's in the tech space that she needs to write a novel. So in the last 18 months, she has um, birthed her first son, moved across the world, grown another human, and now she's finished her first draft. And so many times over the last 18 months, she's been like, Jess, I don't know what I'm doing. This is a word soup. It's terrible. And I keep saying, it's okay. You know, you get this on the page, and then we'll work through your dev ed. We'll figure out what you're really trying to say. And so throughout the process, I've also noticed her being so hard on herself. Oh, well, like I know this part isn't working, or I know I failed at this. And all I can tell her is like, okay, first of all, you wrote a freaking book. You have two humans for whom you are explicitly responsible. You have moved across the world. Give yourself a little bit of grace, right? Allow yourself to relish in the fact of what you've just done. Um, it's really easy to feel frightened by the unknown. And then because we have access to almost unlimited resource on social media, on the internet, we can always find someone who is claiming to be an expert on how to write a synopsis or how to interview your character. Or here's why your midpoint is terrible, whatever it is, that it can feel demoralizing and debilitating. And so I think, especially for new authors coming into the space, the paramount activity, the thing that you absolutely have to do day in and day out is trust that you came to story because there was nowhere else for you to go. You were not going to be able to do this through any other type of art. And from that, you have to trust yourself because as you know, and it creativity is an intrinsic process. It begins from within. And so if you're constantly second guessing yourself, then my gut feeling is you probably won't reach that level of success that you might otherwise. I have a project. It's a memoir, and the author absolutely is one of very few people who can have the story that she's telling. And so I think when we're looking at memoir, everyone's talking about it, of course, how social media has pulled back the lens on our lives, which is to say, your cancer story, though impactful and important, has less weight at this point because you just no one, it's not that no one cares, but no one cares, right? So if you are pitching memoir, make sure whatever story you're telling is absolutely the only story that you can tell. No one else has it. And then also, I think I'm seeing a lot of memoir that's like 80,000 words. And that's long for the genre, right? So I always recommend using the letter E structure. So a small letter E. You start with the through line of, what's going to be your narrative thread. And then you come back, you regress, right, to how you started to come to that point, and then you have the resolution. And I think that that's a really nice way to frame it instead of looking for a three-act structure or, the hero's journey, if you will, because that's not what memoir is. You can't really tell that story in that form. Yeah, just don't give us a prologue. We don't need the prologue. Eat, Pray, Love came out before we were all, I mean, I think at that point we were all on Facebook and it said your name and is, right? Like we didn't understand the platforms or what we're doing with social media. I think it's time for I survived a cult, went on to earn a PhD, and now I'm giving TED Talks. And this is why I'm doing this, right? It's coming back to the why of it instead of I survived a cult. But it's not just I went through this thing and I triumphed because lots of people go through lots of stories and they triumph. It's I went through this thing and no one else could have gone through it. And it's that specificity. I mean, I think social media is changing everything for sure. Um, it feels uncomfortable and awkward for lots of us elder millennials. Like I'm just gonna date myself, it's fine. But that's where we are. And so if we're looking at memoir specifically, there was a time at which you could have an experience of, oh, I became my mother's caretaker as she transitioned to hospice, and here's what I learned. And the general public would find some knowledge in that. They would learn something from you. Now, all of that just goes on your socials because you're talking about it in real time. So we can't position the genre in that way of saying, here's what I learned, because you've already given us all of that. And then opening that up wider, I think that social media can be so useful for authors if we understand how to use it, which is to say, we don't need to promote, we don't need to offer um, querying tips and writing tips. We need to attract, we need to magnetize the people who want to read our books. Platform can be your best friend when you know how to use it. We just saw everything that happens with TikTok, and that's a reminder that you should never rely on your platform. You should rely on your email lists because we never know what's going to happen with a platform. So rather than trying to keep your followers up, think about building a community. Because that's what you really need is you need a community. And when you take away this concept of followers and like for like, etc., it really does become that village that we all kind of like laughed about in the 80s, but like that's what it is. It takes a village. So yeah, build your community and build your list. So looking ahead, I think all writers have something to look forward to this year, which is we have our communities. And that is the way that we persist, that is the way that we resist, and that is the way that we remind the world that art is necessary.